I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. It all started like any other Thursday. The morning rush was the same as always, getting the kids ready for school, packing lunches, and squeezing in a quick cup of coffee before the day took off. Claire was away on one of her frequent business trips, so it was just me and the kids, navigating the usual chaos of a weekday morning. My wife worked for a marketing firm, handling accounts and clients that often took her out of town. These trips weren't unusual. They were part of the routine, something I had grown accustomed to over the years. I never questioned them. Why would I? We'd been married for nearly 11 years, and I had no reason to doubt her. We had 2 beautiful kids and a life most people would envy. Or so I thought. That Thursday, as I rushed around trying to keep everything on track, something small but significant shifted in my world. It was a moment I would have dismissed as nothing, just another part of the daily grind, but looking back, it was the beginning of the end. I was cleaning out Claire's car, a task I did regularly since she often came back from these work trips with her car full of papers, fast food wrappers, and the occasional forgotten toy the kids left behind. This time, though, I found something that didn't belong. A condom. Just one, tucked under the passenger seat, still in its wrapper. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it, the rest of the world fading into a dull hum around me. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it had slipped out of someone's bag, a coworker's, a friend's, who knows. But deep down, I knew. Something was wrong. Claire and I didn't use condoms. We hadn't in years. There was no logical reason for one to be in her car. I stood there, holding that small piece of latex like it was a bomb ready to explode, and in a way, it was. My first instinct was to call her, demand an explanation, but then a colder, more calculated part of me took over. I could confront her, sure. I could storm into her office, throw the evidence in her face, and watch her squirm. But what good would that do? No, I decided, this required a different approach. If she was cheating, and it seemed likely she was, then I needed more than just a condom under a seat. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. And once I had it, I would make sure she regretted every single lie she had told. The first few days after finding the condom were the hardest. Every time I looked at her, I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I played my part, smiling when she came home, acting like nothing had changed. I had to bide my time. She returned from her trip that Friday evening, her suitcase in tow, hair slightly frazzled from travel, but with that same charming smile she always wore. "God, it's good to be home," she said, dropping her bags by the door and coming in for a kiss. I almost recoiled, but forced myself to meet her halfway, my lips brushing hers, though they felt cold and distant. "How was the trip?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, casual. "Exhausting," she sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "Back-to-back meetings, and the client was being a nightmare. I'm just glad it's over." I nodded, watching her closely, every movement, every word she spoke. Was there something different? Did she look guilty? Nervous? I couldn't tell. If she was hiding something, she was doing a damn good job of it. The weekend passed like any other. We took the kids to their soccer games, had dinner with friends, and spent a lazy Sunday morning watching cartoons with the kids. But beneath the surface, everything felt wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about that condom, couldn't stop picturing her with someone else. It was like a virus, eating away at me, spreading through every thought, every moment we shared. That Monday, after the kids were off to school and Claire had left for work, I made my first move. I hired a private investigator. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad movie, but I didn't see any other way. If I confronted her now, she'd lie. She'd deny everything, and I wouldn't be able to prove a thing. No, I needed someone who could follow her, watch her when I couldn't, and gather the evidence I needed. The PI was a quiet, efficient man in his late 40s. He didn't ask many questions, just the basics: where she worked, her routine, when she traveled. I gave him everything he needed, my stomach churning the whole time. Part of me still hoped this was all a misunderstanding, that he wouldn't find anything, that I was just being paranoid. But the other part of me knew better. As the days passed, I found myself watching Claire even more closely. Every phone call she took, every text she sent, every late night at the office, it all felt suspicious. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, scanning through her messages, her emails. But there was nothing. If she was having an affair, she was covering her tracks well. A week later, the PI called. He had something for me. I drove to his office, a small, nondescript building on the edge of town. My heart raced as I sat across from him, waiting for the blow to land. He handed me a file, thick with photographs and reports. "She's been seeing him for months," he said, his voice low and calm. "A colleague from her office. They meet up during her business trips, sometimes even in the city when she tells you she's working late." I opened the file, my hands trembling. There it was, photos of Claire with another man. They were at a hotel, laughing, holding hands, kissing. It was all there, laid out in front of me like some sick joke. I sat in silence, staring at the evidence. My worst fears confirmed, the life I thought I had crumbling before my eyes. But amidst the devastation, there was also a flicker of satisfaction. I had what I needed. Now, it was my turn to act. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was controlled, focused. I had a plan now, a clear path forward. Claire didn't know it yet, but she had made the biggest mistake of her life. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. That would come later, when the timing was right. For now, I would continue to play my part, the loving, unsuspecting husband, while I set the stage for her downfall. This wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about making sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my belief in the life we had built together. Now, I was going to take everything from her. Claire had no idea what was coming. After I met with the private investigator, I spent the following weeks perfecting my plan. Revenge wasn't going to be a quick strike, it was going to be methodical, slow, and devastating. She'd feel it in every corner of her life. But I had to keep my head cool. I couldn't let her see that I knew anything. Not yet. Our mornings and evenings continued in their usual rhythm, a routine we had perfected over the years. She kissed the kids goodbye before heading out for another long day at the office, and I played the role of the doting husband, making sure the kids were dressed, fed, and off to school. Inside, I seethed with rage every time I saw her. Her laughter with the kids, her casual touch on my arm, it was all tainted by the knowledge that she was seeing someone else. I had all the evidence I needed now, but gathering the proof wasn't the hard part. The hard part was waiting. The PI had documented everything, her secret meetings with her colleague, their weekend trips under the guise of business, the phone calls, the texts. All of it. And while she was sneaking around, betraying me at every turn, I made sure everything at home was perfect. Claire didn't suspect a thing. That was key to my plan. It was a Saturday morning when the opportunity presented itself. We were sitting at breakfast with the kids, the usual chaos of pancakes and spilled juice surrounding us. Claire was scrolling through her phone, and I caught a glimpse of a notification lighting up the screen, a message from him. She quickly turned the phone over, but it was too late. I knew the pattern now. I recognized the signs. She was planning another work trip. I decided to strike. "You've been traveling a lot lately," I said, keeping my voice light as I sipped my coffee. "Must be exhausting, all those back-to-back meetings." She looked up, slightly startled, but recovered quickly. "Yeah, It's been pretty busy, she said, forcing a smile. But it's all part of the job, you know. I nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but inside, my mind was already spinning. I had to play this just right. That reminds me, she continued, I've got another trip next weekend. Just a quick one. Shouldn't be more than a couple of days. There it was. The lie. The same pattern as always. But this time, I was ready. Another trip? I asked, feigning concern. You've been working so hard lately, Claire. Maybe you should take a break after this one. We could go on a family trip, just the four of us. Get away for a while. She hesitated, glancing down at her phone before looking back at me. I'd love to, really, but things are just so busy at work right now. Maybe later in the summer. I nodded again, offering her a smile. Of course, whenever you're free. We'll make it work. The conversation shifted, and we went back to our usual breakfast banter, but I could see the subtle relief in her eyes. She thought she had dodged the bullet. She had no idea I was setting the trap. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I started laying the groundwork for the final phase of my plan. I spent hours at my computer, reviewing financial documents, gathering all the information I needed to ensure that when the hammer came down, it came down hard. Claire had always trusted me with the finances, never once questioning how the money was managed. She was about to find out that this was a mistake. I drafted a series of legal documents, ensuring that I would take full control of our assets, the house, the cars, everything. She wouldn't know what hit her. By the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. I wasn't going to just end the marriage, I was going to strip her of everything she held dear. And then there were the kids. That part was trickier. No matter what happened between Claire and me, I didn't want to hurt Emma and Daniel. They were innocent in all of this, and I wasn't going to let them become collateral damage. I'd make sure they were with me, that they were taken care of, protected from the fallout that was about to tear their mother's world apart. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Claire was busy with work, or so she said, and I used the time to make sure everything was in place. I met with a lawyer to finalize the paperwork, ensuring that my plan was airtight. I had enough evidence of her infidelity to guarantee that I'd get full custody of the kids, and with the financial arrangements I had set up, she wouldn't be able to contest a thing. I was ready. Friday night arrived, and Claire left for her business trip. She kissed the kids goodbye, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and told me she'd be back on Sunday evening. I watched her go, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction as she walked out the door, oblivious to the fact that this would be the last time she left me without consequences. After she was gone, I called my lawyer. The papers were ready. All I had to do was wait until Sunday night. By the time Claire walked back through that door, her life would never be the same. I spent the weekend with the kids, taking them to the park, playing board games, and making sure they had no idea that anything was wrong. We had a normal weekend, filled with laughter and fun, while I mentally prepared for the storm that was about to hit. Sunday evening arrived, and I waited for Claire to come home. The kids were already in bed by the time I heard her key in the door. She walked in, looking tired but smiling as she set her bag down by the entrance. "Hey," she said softly, coming over to kiss me. "Miss me?" I smiled back, but there was no warmth in it. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay? Why don't you sit down?" I gestured to the couch, and she hesitated before taking a seat. I sat across from her, the file of evidence in my lap. "I know about him," I said quietly, watching her face carefully. "I know about the affair, Claire." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then she started to stammer, trying to deny it, trying to explain, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't lie to me anymore. I have proof. I know everything. The color drained from her face as she realized I wasn't bluffing. I set the file down on the table in front of her and opened it, revealing the photos, the texts, the receipts. She looked down at the evidence, her hands shaking. She began, her voice barely above a whisper, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I stood up, towering over her as she sat there, helpless. It's over, Claire. I've already filed for divorce. You're going to sign the papers, and you're going to leave this house. The kids stay with me. You can see them on weekends. She looked up at me, tears filling her eyes. Please, she whispered, don't do this. I still love you. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. I shook my head. It's too late for that. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands, but I felt nothing. No pity, no compassion. She had done this. She had destroyed our family, and now she was going to pay the price. I'll give you a few days to pack your things, I said coldly. After that, you're out. This house is mine. Everything is mine. Claire looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. What about the kids? She whispered. They'll be fine, I said, my voice hard. But you won't be around to screw up their lives anymore. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands as I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. Claire spent the next few days in a haze of disbelief and panic. I watched her pack her things slowly, each item she placed in a box weighed down with her tears. I didn't care. The betrayal had broken something inside me, and there was no fixing it. She tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize, but I was done listening. I had already made up my mind. The papers were signed, the deal was done. I wanted her out of my life, and nothing she said could change that. By Wednesday, most of her things were gone. I gave her a deadline, Thursday evening, she was to leave the house for good. She didn't fight me on it. I think she knew there was no point. Whatever we had was dead. Meanwhile, I had already started making plans for the future. My lawyer assured me that, with the evidence I had, I was almost guaranteed full custody of the kids. I had taken control of all our finances, made sure the house was in my name, and ensured that Claire would walk away with as little as possible. She would have to rebuild her life from scratch, without me, without the comfort and stability she'd grown used to. I was taking everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. The day she left was a gray, rainy Thursday. Fitting, I thought, as I watched her load the last of her boxes into her car. The kids were at school, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. Claire stood by the driver's side door for a long moment, looking back at the house, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I didn't say a word as I stood in the doorway, watching her. She walked up to me, hesitating before speaking. Mark, she said softly, her voice shaking, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need you to know, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her, my face expressionless. You did hurt me, I said coldly. And now you're paying for it. She flinched at my words, but nodded. I know, she whispered. I deserve this. But please, don't take the kids away from me. That was the one thing she hadn't been able to let go of. Even as she packed up her life and prepared to leave, she had begged me not to take Emma and Daniel away from her. It was the only point where she had fought back, and for a moment, just a moment, I had considered it. Not for her sake, but for the kids. They loved their mother, and I knew it would devastate them to lose her. But then I thought about what she had done, how she had lied to them, to me, how she had broken our family apart. And I decided she didn't deserve their love. Not after what she had done. I would make sure they stayed with me, where they belonged. You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with someone else, I said, my voice cold and steady. Claire's face crumpled, and she started sobbing again, but I didn't move. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I had no sympathy left. Please, she choked out between sobs, I'm their mother. I love them. Don't take them from me. I shook my head slowly. They deserve better than this, Claire. Better than you. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and nodded. I'm going to fight for them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't care what happens to me, but I'll fight for them. For a second, I admired her determination. But it didn't change anything. She might fight, but I had already won. I had the evidence, the resources, the plan. This was a battle she wasn't equipped to win. Good luck with that, I said, my tone laced with finality. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and desperation, but she didn't say anything else. She turned and walked back to her car, the rain soaking her hair and clothes as she climbed inside. Without another glance, she drove away, leaving behind the life we had built together, now shattered beyond repair. As the taillights of her car disappeared down the road, I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. It was done. She was gone. The house felt strangely quiet without her. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks, ever since I found out about the affair, had finally dissipated, leaving behind an eerie silence. I walked through the house, taking in the emptiness of it. Her presence had been scrubbed clean. No more clothes in the closet, no more makeup on the bathroom counter. It was just me now. Me and the kids. And that was exactly how I wanted it. But as I sat down at the kitchen table, I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me. The satisfaction I had expected to feel wasn't there. Yes, I had gotten what I wanted. Claire was gone. I was free. But instead of the victory I had envisioned, there was only an empty hollow in my chest. I pushed the feeling aside, convincing myself that it was just the aftershock of a long, brutal battle. I had done what needed to be done. Claire had betrayed me, and now she was facing the consequences. I had taken back control of my life, and in time, I would move on. I just needed to focus on the kids, on rebuilding our lives without her. The kids came home from school that afternoon, and I told them the news as gently as I could. They took it about as well as I had expected. Emma burst into tears, demanding to know why her mother had left. Daniel, always quieter, just stared at me, his face pale and expressionless. She didn't leave you, I said, trying to soothe them. She just needs some time to figure things out. But you're staying here with me, okay? Everything's going to be fine. Emma wasn't convinced. Why can't we see her? She asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation to them without giving away too much. You'll still see her, I said finally. But things are going to be different now. Your mom and I, we aren't going to be together anymore. The room was silent for a long moment as they processed what I had said. Emma cried harder, burying her face in her hands, and Daniel just sat there, staring at the floor. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them it would all be okay, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. Eventually, I got them both to calm down, and we spent the evening watching movies, trying to distract ourselves from the weight of what had just happened. But even as I sat there with my kids, trying to reassure them, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept myself busy with work, with the kids, with anything that could distract me from the creeping emptiness that had settled in my chest. Claire was gone, and I had won. But for some reason, it didn't feel like a victory. It wasn't until the following weekend that the cracks started to show. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through the channels on TV when my phone rang. It was Claire. I hesitated for a moment before answering. What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. I I just wanted to talk, she said quietly. About the kids. Of course, it was about the kids. It was always about the kids. She was using them as leverage, trying to worm her way back into my life. But I wasn't going to let that happen. What about them? I asked, my tone clipped. I miss them, Mark, she said softly. I miss them so much. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. You should have thought about that before you cheated on me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again. I made a mistake, Mark. But I'm still their mother. Please don't keep them from me. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. We'll figure something out, I said through gritted teeth. But don't expect things to go back to the way they were. You made your bed, Claire. Now you have to lie in it. I hung up before she could say anything else, the familiar anger boiling in my veins. She wasn't going to guilt me into letting her back into our lives. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to change it. But even as I sat there, fuming, that same hollow feeling gnawed at me again. I had won. I had everything I wanted. But it didn't feel like enough. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I wondered if it ever would be. The days after Claire left stretched on like a blur of half-formed thoughts and endless tasks. I told myself that I had won, that this was what justice felt like. I focused on the kids, on making sure they were adjusting, doing everything I could to be the perfect father. I threw myself into work, keeping busy, keeping distracted. But no matter what I did, there was a strange emptiness gnawing at me, something I couldn't shake. I spent every evening going through the motions, pretending that life had returned to normal. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Claire had been the enemy, the one who had betrayed me, but now that she was gone, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had lost something too. Then, one evening, about a month after Claire had left, I came home to an empty house. The kids were spending the weekend with their grandparents, giving me some much-needed time to myself. I poured myself a drink and sat down at the kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in around me. I glanced at my phone, seeing a missed call from Claire earlier that day. I hadn't bothered to call her back. I figured she was probably trying to negotiate more time with the kids, and I wasn't in the mood to argue. But something made me hesitate. Something about the way things had been left unfinished between us. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and called her. She answered almost immediately, her voice quiet and hesitant. Mark? Yeah, I said, keeping my voice flat. You called. There was a pause on the other end. I wanted to talk to you about the kids, she said softly. I miss them. And, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I closed my eyes, the familiar bitterness rising in my throat. Claire, we've already been through this. I told you, things aren't going to go back to how they were. I know, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I'm not asking for that. I want to talk. Can we meet? Please. Something in her tone caught me off guard. It wasn't desperation, it was more like resignation. For a moment, I considered turning her down, telling her there was nothing left to discuss. But something stopped me. Fine, I said after a long pause. Tomorrow. Noon. At the park. We met the next day under the gray skies of autumn, the park nearly empty, with only the occasional jogger passing by. Claire stood near the playground, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She looked thinner, more fragile, like the weight of everything had finally taken its toll. I approached her slowly, not sure what to expect. What do you want, Claire? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and full of regret. I didn't come here to fight, she said softly. I know I've done horrible things. And I don't expect forgiveness. But there's something you need to know. I folded my arms, not sure where this was going but bracing myself for another round of excuses or pleas for sympathy. Go on, I said, my voice flat. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I got these last week, she said, holding it out to me. I wasn't sure whether I should tell you, but you deserve to know. I frowned, taking the envelope from her. It was plain, unmarked, just a simple piece of paper inside. I unfolded it, scanning the text, and felt my stomach drop. It was a medical report. Blood tests. Results from a clinic I didn't recognize. The words "Stage 3" leaped off the page, followed by "malignant." I read it again, not fully understanding what I was seeing. Claire, what is this? I asked, my voice shaky, suddenly unsure. She looked away, her lips trembling as she spoke. It's cancer, Mark. I was diagnosed last month. That's why I've been calling. I didn't want to just drop this on you, but I didn't know how else to tell you. I stood there, staring at her, my mind reeling. Cancer? How could this be? The woman who had torn my life apart, the one I had spent the last months resenting, was now standing before me with a death sentence hanging over her head. I don't understand, I muttered. How bad is it? It's bad, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. The doctors say it's aggressive. There's a treatment plan, but it's not a good prognosis. I felt my hands trembling as I clenched the paper, a whirlwind of emotions crashing through me. I had spent so long hating her, planning my revenge, tearing her down. And now she was facing something far worse than anything I could have ever inflicted. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to use it as an excuse, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't want you to think I was trying to win your sympathy or manipulate you. You deserve to know the truth about what I did. And now I'm just trying to figure out how to move forward. I don't want to lose the kids, Mark. But I know I can't fight for them anymore. I don't have the strength. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The weight of everything, her betrayal, my anger, the kids, it all seemed so insignificant now. I had spent months planning her downfall, and now she was falling apart on her own. What do you want from me, Claire? I asked, my voice cracking. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow. I don't want anything from you, she said softly. I just want to do right by the kids. I want them to know that I love them, no matter what happens. And I want to make things right between us before it's too late. I stared at her, the bitterness in my heart warring with something deeper, something I hadn't felt in months. Empathy. She had hurt me, betrayed me, broken my trust in ways I thought were unforgivable. But now, standing there, I couldn't help but see the woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, facing her own mortality. I don't know how to make this right, I said quietly, the anger draining from my voice. I don't know if we can. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't expect forgiveness, Mark. I just don't want to leave things like this. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything we had been through hanging between us. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt, it was all still there. But so was the history, the love we once shared, the family we had built together. I'll tell the kids, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. And we'll figure this out. Together. Claire looked up at me, her face crumpling with relief and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you, Mark. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I watched her walk away, her figure small and fragile against the gray sky, I realized that revenge hadn't given me what I thought it would. In the end, life had dealt its own cruel blow, one that I could never have anticipated. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I wasn't sure who had truly lost in the end.